Well, hello, everyone. Thank you again so much for joining this little study as we look into the Hebrew and as it pertains to God's Word. And again, the purpose of this, and I pray that it's a blessing into your life and that um, you begin to see, as I have just been so touched by how much God's Word has for us and what we can learn. And again, the purpose of this is not to just acquire knowledge, but to be able to revere God in a way that at least for me, I didn't believe was even possible, and to see God's word in such a way and to increase in my love and my reverence for him because of what his word reveals to me is my purpose for doing this. And I hope that you feel that too. So as you notice on your screen, we are in 1 Samuel chapter 18 and picking up with the 5th verse. We had a little bit of a diversion last week and picking back up on verse 5. This is after David had dispatched Goliath, and things are changing, rapidly changing. And so we see in verse 5 here that Vayitse David b'chol asher yishlachenu Shaul Yashkeel. And what I want to look at is this word Yashkeel is just a very interesting word that jumped out to me. Of course, in the King James, it's translated as behaved himself wisely. And that was what piqued my interest as to how did he do this? How was this accomplished? How was it noticed by others? Obviously, the book of Samuel, we don't know the authorship, but we believe it was written by Samuel himself. So this was written about David by another person. So what was David's actions like? This is what intrigued me is David was a man after God's own heart. And so he is setting an example that many people, myself included, would love to emulate. And so I'm looking at this saying, okay, how did he behave himself so that others saw him? And it's translated as wisely. So let's take a look and see what the Hebrew can tell us. First of all, we notice underneath that this is a verb. It's in a hifil state, which means it's reflexive. Hifil is something that comes from within. It's not totally active. It's somewhat passive. But yet it's active. So one of those strange words here that in this form shows something coming from within. And so it's also in an imperfect form, which means it's not a completed action. It's something he's growing in. It's something that is an active growth in his life. So let's click on this number, and it gives us the root of Sachal, and it means to be prudent, a short definition. We look at Brown Driver Briggs, which is kind of the base work standard for how we start unpacking this. Tells us where it comes from, show oneself attentive. Okay, I like that as a beginning to unpack this word. The hifil here, again, you'll see words that are interesting. It uses the word jussive, which is another way of looking at how this word, how it gets its meaning. What is its depth? What is its emotion behind it? So again, not seeing a lot here, to be prudent. So let's take a look, and it doesn't tell me how many times it's being used in the translation. It unfortunately doesn't give us that, which normally it does. So we're going to go and look in the dictionary of the Targumim. This is by Marcus Jastrow, who, as many of you will remember, is a Jewish sage who, or Jewish scholar, I would say, who recorded this and took the Jewish translation from what are called the Targumims. These are Aramaic expounding of the scriptures. They are like a commentary written by the Jewish sages through the ages and was compiled here by Marcus Jastrow. So it's a very wise work, very interesting work. And so when we look at the Shin, Kaf, and Lamed letters, Sin, Kaf, and Lamed letters, we here see that it is in the Hifil form, to be wise, to understand, to consider, but its root comes from a Samic Kaf, Lamed, which means to be bright and to shine. I really love that explanation of reflecting of something that's going on within you, from an outside source, that you are reflecting and letting others see us. There's many wonderful biblical words about this reflection of giving praise. We find them in the Psalms, Psalm 145, which is one of my favorite Psalms, called the Ashrei. Has many words that talk about allowing God to shine through us. So we get the understanding that David was shining. He was allowing himself to be a bright light to a lost and a dying world, as we like to apply to ourselves. And so that is what's really cool about this word here, that in how it applies to David. So he was shining, and this was noticed by others, and Saul noticed it, set him over all of his army, the men of war. And then the second part of this verse I find is also very interesting. Don't know why this was necessary to write, that he was accepted in the sight of all the people. I understand that, that makes sense. But then this last part, it says, V'gam b'nei abdei Shaul, that he was accepted in the sight of all of Saul's servants. And I'm trying to process this and see why it was necessary to have this written. What is this trying to tell us? Some of it that I gleaned from other reading, other studies, other exposure that I had, is servants lived in the household of the king, and they were privy to many things that the common people were not privy to. The people saw the public side of the king. Just as today, you can imagine that in the White House, where we have our president and presidents past and presidents future, there are servants. There are those that live in the White House that clean the walls, clean the floors, make the meals, take care of the bed. They do all these things. They get to see the president when he's not being the president. They get to see him as a normal person, when he's not putting on a show in front of all the people. And at least sometimes you hear rumors that those that work in the White House have a very different view of the president than maybe what is given in the public eye or when he's in front of the cameras. And they know him, they know his family, they know how he treats his wife and his children, they know how he reacts when the microphones are off. And many times they have quite a different story to tell, and some of them will publish books about it later on. But here, this is where I believe the insight comes in, is the servants of Saul, who knew how Saul behaved, who saw his fits and his tantrums, and obviously a side of him that the public didn't see, loved David. They saw David for who he really was. He was down at their level, and he related to them well and won the hearts of the common people, won the hearts of maybe those that were lowly and despised in the kingdom, being the servants of Saul. And I think that just adds a wonderful level of understanding as to the nature of who David was, and made people love him. So moving on to verse 6, here's where it starts to get real fun. It happened, David was returning from the slaughter. Again, we don't always quite understand the chronology of this. It would appear that verse 5 may be reflecting an attitude that happened after verse 6 occurred, because as they were coming home from the slaughter of the Philistines, this was a joyous celebration. So the women of all the cities of Israel came out and they were singing and dancing. Here you'll notice, of course, this kativ and kathiv of what is written and what is spoken, the two words of lasor versus lashir. Lashir is the word for song. Lasor is a word that has passed out of common usage and has been replaced by lashir. And so they were singing and dancing, and they came to meet King Saul with tambourines and with joy. Obviously, it was a party. They were happy. Goliath had been slain, the Philistines had been slain, and so they were very happy. But as they composed their song in verse 7, here's where the drama starts. So they were singing and dancing, and said that Saul has slain his thousands. Again, you see the words in brackets and parentheses versus the kativ versus the kariv, what is written, what is understood. And the word for thousands is here in aleph, the aleph lamed pei. And then, of course, the bait preposition implies that it's in his thousands or to his thousands. But then David, they ascribe, and it's translated 10,000s, but the word itself is really has a root of the resh bait. It's really rabbah. And so as we unpack this, we see that it means more, it can mean an undetermined number, a myriad, numerous numbers of people, sometimes ascribe 10,000s, sometimes more than that, remembering that in these biblical times, math was not in its form as we find later on after the Greeks were influential in introducing math and sciences. So math was a very basic ingredient, very basic tool at this time. And most people were illiterate. Most people had no need to count above 100 because there was just no need for numbers in this large arena. And so you'll find numbers in the Bible are somewhat suspect because math was in its infancy and counting was very challenging, and people weren't used to counting, and they don't even have words above 1,000. And so they multiply this in the terms of thousands. And so we see this word doesn't really mean 10,000s. It just means a large number beyond what they could count. And so they said it's a myriad. And so obviously with verse 8, Saul is kind of saying, whoa, I don't like what's happening here. And Saul was, meod is a very basic word we learn in Hebrew from the beginning, and it means just very. And so Saul was Vayichar LeShaul meod. He was very angry, and Vayira, it says displeased, but that's another ra word. Ra words in Hebrew always have something to do with being angry, being upset, being displeased. And so he says this word hadavar, which are words from his heart. So this is betraying what is really going on inside of Saul, that these are not just simple words. He's saying these are very serious words from his heart. And he said, oh, they've given David 10,000s, and to me, they only gave a smaller amount. What's left for this to happen? What more can be given to him except the kingdom? And it said, so from that day onward, Saul kept his eye. Again, here we see the two words of the kariv and kativ of different words for keeping his eye upon him. And this just means that he was under his watchful gaze and suspicion. You can just feel the mood here changing from David being the hero and Saul being happy for what happened to now he's the suspect. He's the mole. He's the one in the castle that they got to keep their eye on, and Saul is wary of him from that day forward. So I hope you enjoyed this study today. See how the Bible does give us a deeper insight of what the mood, what the flavor. I hope you caught some of that, of what the emotions are going on here between David and Saul, and David and the people, and how David is going into this with the support of the people, and Saul is losing the support of the people. And so uh, may God's blessing be upon you this day, and thank you again for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your week, and hopefully see you next week. Bye-bye.